Europe is more decisive than ever to stand for Ukraine as long as it needs. I wonder if that has anything to do with Trump's presidential anointment. Second topic, Zelensky announced Ukrainian long-range missiles being tested in Ukraine. And an interview with an expert, Alexander Hara, on China and the United States in the Ukrainian context. Of course, good afternoon. These topics in more detail in a daily episode with me, Henry Keenan, UATV English, doing our best to bring the hard truth in easy terms for the whole free world, directly from Ukraine. Europe starts to realize what actually have to be grasped almost 3 years ago. EU must take on the historic responsibility of helping Ukraine for its own European sake, and especially in the wake of Trump's rise. So I guess, thank you, Mr. Trump, already for that, because better late than never, right? And Poland has shown bravery and strength and clearly stated the desire to become the driving force behind a new coalition of Ukraine's allies without Trump. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk will meet with the President of France, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, the head of NATO and the leaders of the 8 countries, Northern Europe, that are Baltic states as well, to discuss transatlantic cooperation and the war in Ukraine. The future of aid to Ukraine is finally taken by new allies precisely as it should have been taken a long time ago, as an investment in Europe's own security, and no doubt one of the main issues the European Union is facing after Donald Trump's victory in the US elections.
There is no doubt that this new political landscape is a serious challenge for everyone, especially in the context of a possible end to the Russian-Ukrainian war as a result of an agreement between, for example, the President of Russia and the new President of the United States. In the coming days, we will very intensively coordinate cooperation with countries that have very similar views on the geopolitical and transatlantic situation and the situation in Ukraine. Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk.
Tusk said that French President Emmanuel Macron and NATO head Mark Rutte would soon visit Warsaw, and he would also meet with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, either in Warsaw or London. Tusk will also meet with the leaders of the 8 countries in Stockholm, in addition to France and UK and all Northern Europe. The new coalition of allies will include the Netherlands, Italy, the Czech Republic, Romania and some other countries in the Balkans and all of Eastern Europe. And starting around the new year, Kaja Kallas, former Prime Minister of Estonia, will become the EU's foreign policy chief, which will also hopefully shake up Europe a bit. And I would like to draw your attention to something else here. The UK Chief of the Defence Staff, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, said that Russian troops were losing an average of 1,500 killed and wounded every day in October, bringing the toll of 700,000 and rising since the war began in February 2022. Sir Tony said the Russian people were paying, I quote, extremely high price, end of quote, for Putin's invasion.
Russia is on track to suffer 700,000 killed and wounded. That is the immense pain and suffering that Putin's ambitions have caused the Russian nation. These losses have been offset by only tiny gains in land, and Russia spends more than 40% of its public spending on defense and security, a huge burden. Western allies will remain resolute for as long as it takes. That is the message that President Putin should get, and that should reassure President Zelensky. Sir Tony Radakin, British Royal Navy Admiral.
With all due respect, Mr. Admiral, sir, you obviously know everything there is to know in military affairs and probably even beyond that. However, you know nothing about Russia and Russians in general and the dictator Vladimir Putin in particular. Let me please shed some light on the matter for you. Well, first things first. Every country has a national idea. A national idea of Russia is, we don't care. And that's what they are doing right now, not caring. The Russians openly spit on these losses, on the future into the face of the West, in your face, Admiral. While you are addressing Putin, he continues to bomb and shell peaceful cities in Ukraine, killing adults and children, while the timid West talks about determination and as long as it takes. Russians don't care. And this is exactly what the collective West will always fail to understand, how deep in the core of Russian mentality this indifference lies. This is what General Eisenhower failed to understand. He was horrified to learn how, at the end of the World War II, Joseph Stalin was going to demine thousands of square kilometers of land. With people, Admiral. Russians drove forward other Russians under the threat of immediate execution. Exactly the same thing is happening in Ukraine these days. And just like no one in Russia cared about it back then in World War II, Russians don't give a damn now. You probably hardly believe me, do you, Admiral? Well, I get it. It's unthinkable by a Westerner to suggest that human life can have not just small but negative value, and you can waste as many as hundreds, thousands, or even millions of Russian lives just to satisfy your ill territorial ambitions, and absolutely nothing will happen about it in Russia. Remember what Putin said in response to a Western journalist's question about what happened to the Russian submarine Kursk. It sank, he said. As an admiral of the British Navy, would it have occurred to you even to say something similar about the British sailors who died during the tragedy? And Putin did not allow or accept Western help, although the West offered it, and the Russian sailors could have been saved, but they're not worth it, Admiral, you see. If saved, Putin would have then to answer uncomfortable questions from journalists about the technical conditions of the submarine, etc., but as it is, all ends in the water in every sense. It sank. And that's it. Who cares? And the same thing is happening in Ukraine. 700,000 dead, or 1 million, or 2, or 5 million of Russian corpses until the subpoenas do not just go to Putin's criminal hordes, are not handed out in big cities like Moscow or St. Petersburg. Putin doesn't care. And as terrible as it is, neither do Russian people. For there is no Russian people, Admiral. There is no such thing as Russian nation ready to fight for its life and future against the tumor of dictatorship. No, the place of the people in Russia has long been taken by the population, an infantile crowd that enjoys all the benefits of Western civilization, yet hating the West so much for that it is ready to unite around the Kremlin in the name of the death, destruction, and murder. Don't get us wrong, Admiral. Everything you say is correct. And that's probably how it works. In the West. In Russia, no way. And the fact that you operate with facts does credit you because you, sir, are a British admiral. Just assuming that Putin will ever hear you, he won't care. After all, sir, you would be talking to a KGB midget who used the infantilism and the inertness of Russian population and managed to usurp power in Russia, and he abused the power just as any KGB midget would, starting a criminal war of conquest to please himself and the well-fed Philistines of all Mother Russia, whom you mistakenly called the people. The difference is that the people fight for their freedom, just as the Ukrainians do, and the population just doesn't care. In his recent evening address, Zelensky noted the production of Ukrainian weapons, emphasizing that Ukraine has surpassed the mark of producing the first 100 pieces, missiles, this year. Which missiles exactly is not specified yet, but obviously and hopefully, we're talking about strikes deep into Russia. We can also hope to be talking about the Neptunes, maybe improved for strikes against ground targets, or Palyanytsia. Yes, Palyanytsia, or even new Ukrainian ballistics, the testing of which Zelensky has already announced previously. But what we know is that experts assume that Kyiv is now stockpiling these missiles in order to then use them later as an argument during the negotiating track. I can't wait for that to happen. Not only because it will give us in Ukraine a chance to breathe out, as we had just one peaceful night over the past 2 months without Russian UAVs and missiles falling on our heads. But I would also love to see the faces of Putin's representatives in Europe, Viktor Orban, Robert Fico, Zara Wagenknecht, and other Kremlinites who would undoubtedly call it an act of Ukrainian aggression against peaceful Russia. And this is exactly where Russian propaganda has done its tremendous harm. It made some in the West actually believe that Russia is a peaceful country and Ukraine is quasi-Nazi state. And when Putin escalates and kills more civilians and their families in Ukraine, the world says it is a tragedy, but not yet an escalation. And these Ukrainian weapons will finally return us the right that always belonged to us, the right to call an escalation what we in Ukraine consider an escalation. As simple as that. And not those dudes in UN Security Council that allowed themselves to be presided over a country run by a criminal indicted by ICC. That was it for tonight. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate that indeed. It was me, Henry Keane, yet another attempt with my team at UATV English to bring the hard truth in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Like, share and comment. Your voice matters as it helps Ukrainian voice to be heard globally. Please stay safe and tuned for more. Goodbye.